Even though Argentina has a very rich film history and film production, we are not very good at taking care of our audiovisual heritage. We started paying attention to these issues very, very recently. Being a film historian in Argentina made me very aware of the preservation and archiving part of the work. I grew up, and when I was studying film and film history, all we could watch of Prisioneros de la Tierra was a very bad 16mm print that was sometimes showed on TV. So when I arrived at the museum in 2008, and Andres came with me, Prisioneros was certainly, for us, it was a priority. Prisioneros de la Tierra was often considered one of the most important and also one of the best Argentinian films of the studio era and of the Argentinian film history in general.
It was really very well received, by the audience and by the film critics. It was considered a huge film with a huge production, unusual, doesn't look similar to other Argentine films shot in 1939. And for some film critics from the period, they thought that they were was the beginning of a new era for Argentine films.
Mario Soffici is one of the greatest filmmakers, and he opened the door for a lot of social films that were made in Argentina.
Nos tratan como abejas. Sacan el fruto de la tierra y oprimen a los nativos.
Prisioneros de la Tierra addressed these social issues regarding working conditions, in this case, specifically in the yerba mate plantations in the Misiones jungle. But this was not common at all in Argentinian film. And that's why it's usually cited as the first social film in Argentina.
This film was produced by a different studio that was Pampa Film, with a very special owner, Olegario Ferrando. He really knew what kind of films he wanted to produce, what he called in those days like very Argentine films. They were trying to do something original, not to copy anymore the Hollywood films. This is what most of the studios were doing in the 30s. And Olegario Ferrando and Pampa Films, they make this decision, okay, we're ready to make good Argentine films.
What it's interesting about Pampa Films is that Olegario Ferrando encouraged experimentation and encouraged freedom in the films that he was interested in producing. Prisioneros de la Tierra's script is based on 4 short stories by one of the most important Argentinian writers, Horacio Quiroga. Horacio Quiroga wrote mostly short stories. He was very much influenced by Edgar Allan Poe and Conrad and Rudyard Kipling. And he also had a very close relationship with suicide and death. By the time the film was released, Horacio Quiroga had committed suicide himself a year earlier. But his stepfather, his first wife, committed suicide before him, and his 3 children committed suicide after him. So this is a very tragic story, life story, and Horacio Quiroga was very much interested in death, but also in madness and in nature itself.
Horacio Quiroga moved several times to the jungle in Misiones with different wives, and he taught his kids how to survive in the jungle. So what he wrote was based in his own experience.
The book where the stories for Prisioneros de la Tierra came from, that book was called Stories of Love, Madness, and Death. The script was actually written partly by Darío Quiroga, who was Horacio's son, and Ulises Petit de Morat, one of the most important script writers in Argentina in the 30s and 40s.
Even the story, of Prisioneros de la Tierra is very tragic, even though they took from the original short stories some parts that they were even more, terrible.
Soffici made a point of making films on location outside Buenos Aires, in nature, in the pampas or in the mountains, or in this case, Prisioneros, in the jungle.
I think it's a very unusual film for 1939. In those days, we have a pretty big studio system working in Buenos Aires, and I would say 100% of the films, they were shot inside the studios. And when Soffici, they offered him to direct this film and he read the script, he said, well, I want to do it. This is the kind of film that I want to do. The only condition is we have to do it on location. We cannot tell the story inside a studio. And he did. And in this case, so far away from Buenos Aires, in a territory that was very hostile for the whole crew. The film was shot in Misiones, the northern province of Argentina, in the limit with Paraguay and Brazil, part of the Amazonian jungle. Most of the place was just jungle and yerba mate plantations and tobacco plantations. Just to get there was complicated by the routes. They were not in good condition. You have to travel for 3 days from Buenos Aires to arrive to this place.
And then you have the mosquitoes and our own crocodiles, the jaguares, and the humidity and the heat. It's an area where you can tell when you watch the film, the working conditions were very, very difficult. Soffici wanted to live what the workers had to go through to make the film much more realist. Mario Soffici had cast José Gola as the leading character of the film, Esteban Podeley. José Gola was one of the most important leading men in Argentinian film at the time. And he was actually the one who presented the project to Soffici and convinced him to direct it. So it was really tragic what happened. He became sick with appendicitis in the middle of the jungle, and they couldn't get him to hospital on time. So he actually died.
So the project, they thought on the first time to suspend the project, but then they decided to continue with it, and they started looking someone to replace Gola. And this was very, very complicated because Podeley is a very, very special character.
Corner, the antagonist of Podeley, is played by Francisco Petrone, who was definitely one of the most important Argentinian actors of the 30s and 40s.
What makes interesting Corner is these two sides, no? You can see a very mean person, no? And he has a very kind of hate against the Mensúes.
Siempre el mismo, compadrito.
But also he can be very delicate, listening to Beethoven, or how he treats Andrea.
Me dolía verla arruinarse las manos y los ojos cosiendo.
Or how he feeds the dogs because he finds them that they're very hungry. So this is the contrast that makes this character so interesting. He cannot understand the people who are around him. He cannot understand the jungle. He's just a kind of person that, what I'm doing here? Everything is hostile, everything is against me, and he's against everyone and everything.
Usted no ama ni a esta gente ni a esta tierra. Por eso no los comprendo.
Oh, usted está entregado. La tierra colorada ensucia su saco.
Corner is not purely bad, and Podeley is not purely good. And that is something that I find also very interesting about the film. Soffici takes time to build those characters, and they are, all of them, very contradictory. All of them have redeeming characteristics.
Chinita, te llevo en el alma y en la sangre.
Elisa Galvez was one of the many female stars that populated Argentinian films at the time. She was part of the group of what we call the naives. She was always playing this very girly and innocent women. She was mostly the protagonist of romantic comedies and romantic melodramas.
Duermo poco en los últimos tiempos.
The doctor is Raúl de Lange. He was a stage actor. He didn't participate in many films. And he was from Austria. So here he's playing also a foreign person, no, who is in an environment that he cannot understand. He doesn't feel comfortable in that place too.
Yo estoy aquí hace 25 años entre las lluvias, como un tronco que se pudre en un remanso.
In the film's first scene, Esteban Podelet is kissing a woman, in the bordel, and he's going to be the protagonist of the film. And this is a kind of statement of Soffici.
The film is already telling you that it's not going to be the kind of film that you would expect. This is what you're usually expecting of films, and we are not going to do that. We are going to do something very different. Another thing that I think it's very important to point out about Prisioneros de la Tierra is the choice that Soffici made to let the characters, especially the Mensúes, speak in their own language. In that area of Argentina, there is an indigenous language called Guarani, which is actually the indigenous tribes that lived in Misiones and Paraguay and the south of Brazil. The characters sometimes speak Guarani, and they even sing in Guarani. That is something that it's not common at all in Argentinian cinema.
It also makes sense in a narrative sense because the Mensúes, they spoke in Guarani when they are planning the rebellion. So the other ones, they cannot understand what they're saying.
The most famous scene in Prisioneros de la Tierra is the scene where Esteban Podelet whips Corner to death in this very horrible way. Even when he's down in the mud, he keeps whipping him. The scene lasts over 4 minutes, and it's really, at some point, it's really unbearable to watch. And it was actually cut short for TV. We know that when they showed the film on TV, that scene lasted way less than 4 minutes. I think Soffici made it this long because he wanted the audience to think about what was going on. And I think that says a lot about what Soffici wanted to say with this film, to denounce the situation of these yerba mate workers, but also other kinds of workers in Misiones at the time.
This scene shows what Podelet is made of because Soffici, he gave him 4 minutes to repent himself, to maybe show some heart for Corner, and he doesn't. Podelet, he's not going to stop. Corner is the oppressor, and he wants to expulse him from the land because he doesn't belong to that place. So it has a very deep symbolic meaning, this scene too. Ulises Petit de Murat, who wrote part of the script of Prisioneros de la Tierra, he was a member of the Communist Party. So, and he was pretty sure now that in 1939, nothing was going to change for the Mensúes. The end of the film is very negative. They shot Podelet. In that sense, also it's a kind of anti-Hollywood ending. It's like saying, well, this is the real thing. They're not going to win. This is what's going to happen to them.
As usual with film preservation and film restoration projects, this was a collaboration. We knew that the museum held what we thought it was the only 16mm print that existed. Then we learned that a private collector, Fernando Martín Peña, with whom we also collaborate a lot, He also had another 16 millimeter print, but that is nearly almost as having nothing. And the films were badly deteriorated. They were projected a lot. They had some, not scenes, but some parts missing. And that's when Andres started doing some research, looking for other prints around the world.
We found a first generation print in really good shape in France, no, in the Cinematheque. We have heard a rumor that maybe a 35 millimeter print was kept there. And it was an acetate print, but was copied directly from the original negative. And that was the main element for the digital restoration that we finally did. When the Cinematheque sent us a screener of this element, very quickly we realized that this element has a very short missing part, but was at the very beginning of the film. It was an information, no, that was when this story was happening, no, in 1915. And we didn't knew this before because this part was missing from all the other prints. We couldn't believe it when we saw it for the first time. Soffici decided to be very emphatic. He realized that they were doing a big film that was going to have a big audience, you know, and lots of comments. And probably, maybe he talked this with Olegario Ferrando, the owner of Pampa Film, and they decided to avoid any kind of political issue around the film.
It was really a happy day when Andres told me that there was a print at Cinémathèque Française. And we need to thank also the colleagues at the National Film Archive in the Czech Republic and the colleagues at the Cinémathèque Française, because it was a lot of people involved, as usual, in any of these kind of projects. And of course, the Bologna people and the Film Foundation people, so it is an international effort. One of the most important things that happened when we were able to watch the restored version of the film was probably the cinematography of the film. Pablo Tabernero was the cinematographer, and he was one of the most important cinematographers in Argentinian cinema at the time. And you could actually see the huge work that he put into trying to convey the atmosphere that is present in both Horacio Quiroga's short stories and Soffici's idea of what he wanted for the film. You can actually see the jungle and the weather, and it really becomes a character of the film and also helps create this atmosphere that it is so important in Prisioneros de la Tierra. Also the sound, which was very bad, coming from the 16 millimeter prints. There were a lot of dialogue that was missing, and there were a lot of small cuts and stuff that made it a real effort to watch the film.
Como vos, Esteban. Ahora que te tengo cerca, que te toco, sé que no sos un sueño como cuando viniste a mi delirio con tu padre. Era yo, Esteban.
Now with the restored version, for the first time, we can follow the film from the very beginning to the end without interruptions. We can understand what the film critics were talking about in 1939. This is it. Now, this is the film that we wanted to see.
Soffici had what we could call a dream team of cast and crew to make this film. And finally, this restoration does justice to that. And it could turn from being an effort to watch the film to being a complete pleasure.